What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Friday, March 17th, 2017. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. It's also St. Patrick's Day for all you Irish people out there. And everybody's out there celebrating and probably get into the Irish whiskey a little bit later with the Irish lass that I happen to be married to. And we have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, getting on into it, obviously the surveillance issue is still uppermost in a lot of people's mind. In fact, Donald Trump just had his meeting with Angela Merkel, and he's cracking jokes with her about knowing what she feels like because of that big scandal about how Angela Merkel's cell phone was tapped by the Obama administration. And now, of course, we have all of this other surveillance on the Trump campaign. And so they're actually joking about it. This is becoming a laughing stock as far as the U.S. government is concerned here. But the reality is that despite the USA Freedom Act, which was supposed to bring back some restriction, the U.S. government has been involved in mass surveillance. And Edward Snowden revealed the NSA has the capability to scan everybody at any time whenever they want to. No warrant required, and this latest WikiLeaks dump has made it obvious that the Central Intelligence Agency has developed their own parallel system of equal capability, which, of course, is typical of government waste. You've already got one system set up to spy on all the people, so this other agency, to prove how butch they are, they're going to set up their own parallel system at hideous expense. And then sneer at each other and over who's got the best means of violating the Fourth Amendment. Now, interestingly enough, Obama's defenders are trying to play word games, going back to when Donald Trump said that he was subject to wiretapping. And they're trying to take that word literally, saying, no, there's no wiretapping, there's nobody went in to the little telephone box with alligator clips and put a tap on the phone. And, of course, what Trump actually meant, and Sean Spicer has shared this with us, is that he meant all forms of surveillance. And so Kellyanne Conway is out there trying to clarify this, that when they say wiretapping, it's a generic term for all forms of surveillance, and the government has capability to spy on people by means other than a phone tap. And Shepard Smith made the very bad mistake of trying to go after her and just say that's ridiculous, that simply doesn't exist. Well, he's obviously uninformed, or he's covering for the deep state, because in point of fact, one of the reasons they don't go into phone boxes with alligator clips anymore is the current phone system has the eavesdropping technology built in. It was put in by a company called Converse Infosys before 9/11 even happened. There are suspicions that Converse Infosys, which is an Israeli company, left their own back doors into the system so that they could eavesdrop on Americans, including law enforcement officers. And all of this came to light just before 9/11 because drug enforcement officers who were after Israeli drug criminals kept being thwarted. The raids would show up at empty buildings. There'd be no evidence. The people they were after somehow knew where and when the raids were going to be happening. That, in turn, led to the uncovering of the largest foreign spy ring in U.S. history, spying on America for Israel's. And we had these art students who were trying to get these very cheap paintings into government buildings, and they're probably passive radio repeaters based on a technology originally developed by the guy who invented the theremin. Remember that weird-sounding science fiction instrument, the theremin? He also worked for Russian intelligence, and he came up with a system where they could embed a passive radio repeater and a modulator into an object. In the particular case that's in the history books, it was a wooden carved seal of the United States presented to the U.S. ambassador in Moscow by Russian students, and in it was this listening device that was impossible to find because it itself did not emit any radio energy. It would simply take radio energy being beamed into the building from outside and reflect it out another direction, modulated by whatever sound was in that room. And those paintings that the Israeli art students were trying to get in these buildings could be used for the same purpose. This gets us back to Shepard Smith's lack of awareness of spy technology. Yes, the ability to eavesdrop on phone conversations is built into the system, the same way the ability for CIA and NSA and heavens knows who's else to get into our smartphones, our tablets, our desktop computers, our laptops, anything else connected to the internet is now compromised and can be used to spy on you. Getting away from the telephone and the internet, there are other devices, the traditional radio bug, there are laser mics, there are microwave mics, there are all kinds of ways to spy on people, thermographic imaging, sub-millimeter wave imaging, and Shepard Smith just does not know what he's talking about, and he came off looking like a bully, you know, beating up on Kellyanne Conway. Everyone's going after her. The feminists hate her because she's both attractive and competent, and that, of course, undermines that whole feminist culture of perpetual victimhood. I remember the way they went after her, you know, for kneeling on the couch in the Oval Office, which she did to get lower so the people behind her could see. And they even turned that against her. We're going to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. So the question is, we know the CIA is spying on people. And we know that because remember back when the Congress was working on the Senate torture, or rather the CIA torture report, and somebody broke into the computers of the Senate and the senators and erased files about what the CIA was doing to these people. So, yeah, the CIA and NSA are lawless. They will hack anybody, including the civilian leadership of this country. Now, there's a new development. This one just hit the wires a little while ago. Apparently, somebody stole a laptop from the car of a Secret Service agent that not only included all of the blueprints for the Trump Tower, where Trump stays when he's in New York, but apparently classified information regarding the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email server. And it was stolen from a Secret Service agent's car in Brooklyn. They're trying to find where that went and who did it. Reminds me of how those negatives of the Robert Kennedy assassination, after the state of California for years and years said, we lost them, we lost them, we lost them. And then the photographer sued for huge amounts of money in California. Said, oh, these negatives, yes, of course, we've had them up here in Sacramento. We will courier them down to you. And, of course, the courier's car was broken into and the negatives taken. And those negatives would have put to rest questions about a possible conspiracy in the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. Now, before we get out there and start screaming about Russia's influencing our elections and who's influencing our elections, you need to remember President Obama actually encouraged foreigners to meddle in the U.S. elections. Remember that video where he was out there actually encouraging illegal immigrants to vote and saying, no, 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 you won't face deportation, the immigration people won't be there, you can get out and vote if you want to. Well, illegal immigrants are not supposed to vote. They are citizens of a foreign country. So Obama was asking foreigners to meddle in our elections. His issue seems to be that it's okay for the Mexicans to interfere in our elections because they're going to vote Democratic, but it's bad for the Russians to interfere in our elections because they're rooting for the bad guy. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Yeah, right. She didn't lock the doors, I bet, of the car. I mean, come on.
We'll find out.
Mike, it's so blatantly left there for somebody to take. I mean, they're going to be coming for Donald Trump because I don't think they're going to be able to handle 4 years with him there because eventually he's going to get the house in order, and they just can't take that chance, Mike.
I would not be surprised if there was a concerted effort to get rid of Donald Trump by the time we reach summer.
And Mike, hashtag Doctor Who Weeping Angel. Hey, yeah. Mike, what's up with Angela Merkel? I don't know if you talked about this yesterday about her hiring ex-Stasi people to like do censorship of of fake news.
Yeah, we're seeing this all over where everybody's imposing censorship. Apparently Spain wants to throw somebody in jail for like 3 years for cracking a joke on Twitter. And all of these so-called Western democracies are just turning into this iron-fisted tyrants, and they're trying to figure out some way they can do it here in the United States and get around that pesky old right to freedom of speech. It's just getting in our way. This would be so much easier if it was a dictatorship, according to George W. Bush. And but yeah, we're seeing it. France, same thing. They're coming down with all these laws saying you are not allowed to say certain things about certain people. In fact, it's even getting to the point where one of the European countries is now out there saying that there's a ban on all speech not explicitly approved by the government. And that is about as tyrannical and dictatorial as you can get.
Well, Mike, that proves, though, what we've been saying all along. This is a globalist oligarchy that share intelligence between each other so they can skirt the law. And these people are not going to stop until they subjugate, because now they're scared because of the nationalistic movements around the world.
Yes, they are.
So, I expect this year a lot of crazy stuff to happen.
Well, listen, what everybody needs to do is look into all the countries whose leadership are clearly on board with the globalists and look what's happening in there in terms of curtailment of rights and civil liberties and protections and freedom of speech, and you will see exactly what the blueprint for the New World Order is. It will be history's most rigid dictatorship, in part to survive the circumstances and fraud of its own creation. They won't dare let anybody talk about just how it is we came to be under the New World Order. They'll just hold everything locked down for at least a generation so that those of us who saw it all die off and get out of the way, and the next generation raised in the state-controlled schools will believe this is the way it's supposed to be, and everything is so much better today, with that number tattooed on our forehead than those old days of the Bill of Rights and that reckless, Wild West, chaotic turmoil that characterized those free nations.
But it's so easy to see, though, because they're using the same playbook in terms of censorship, in terms of nationalists being homophobe, Islamophobe. It's the same playbook. They didn't even change anything. So you know that this is a group cabal,
Oh, yeah.
People wake up.
Yeah, no, every world leader who's been brought onto this New World Order thing is they're seeing themselves as somehow being eligible for that one world government in some position. That's the payoff for them. To surrender the sovereignty of their own country and their own people to the globalists, they're going to be paid off because they will then be part of that global government, and everybody else will simply be the proletariat, the serfs, the great unwashed, the Eloi, whatever name you want to put on them.
All right, thanks a lot, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Now, getting on back to this issue of Donald Trump, the campaign being surveilled by various means by Obama. Interestingly enough, the Department of Justice has asked for more time to respond to the House request for evidence related to the claim that Donald Trump was being bugged, Watergate 2. But the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Senator Richard Burr, has said that he's received sufficient responses about the accusation. He's talked to all the appropriate people, and apparently at this point it sounds to me like he's already convinced it really did happen. Now, remember, not too long ago, in fact it was late last year, just heading into the election, there was a story that came out of the Hearst newspapers that basically said, in fact it was in a lot of different places, where the FBI was given a FISA court warrant to cover Trump's campaign workers and their possible ties to Russia. Now, right now, the Obama camp is trying to insist that there was no surveillance on the Trump campaign, but the existence of this FISA warrant contradicts that. And we know that this FISA warrant was the second one applied for, and it was justified on the basis of a fraudulent website. Somebody faked a Donald Trump website and initiated computer traffic with a computer in Russia, which now the Russians are saying that was obviously a hacking attack, and they're going to cooperate fully with the Department of Justice on this. So at this point, yeah, there's a lot of smoke. This is shaping up to be a new Watergate, and I'm sure there's a lot of people in especially the old guard in Washington, D.C. are going around saying, oh, are we going to have to go through that mess again? But at this point, Donald Trump is starting to regain the initiative. Gowdy and Chaffetz are bringing on the heat on Obama, on Hillary Clinton. Now, over in Great Britain, GCHQ is out there just indignant, saying it's utterly ridiculous that we would spy on Donald Trump. We're spies. We would never lie to you. Yeah. You know, those movies where James Bond is this gentleman and he's really a nice guy who just happens to have a gun. Those are just movies. Real spies, kind of, imagine mafia thugs wrapped in national flags, and that's really what you're dealing with there. Anyway, as I said, this Russian bank that was the other end of this traffic, that was held up as the one piece of evidence showing collusion between Trump and Russia. The Russian bank is saying that this series of communications, and it's resumed recently, between one of its computers and an email server tied to President Trump's business empire, they've been watching for this, and they've developed evidence that this is work of a hijacker trying to create a hoax, trying to establish some kind of a communication where none exists. Remember when the Department of Homeland Security was caught trying to break into voter databases here in the United States of America, at least 5 different states? They weren't able to do it. And everybody's saying, what were they trying to do? Well, maybe they were trying to use some of the CIA's Project Umbrage software to make it look like Russia really had hacked our election. And they failed to do so, thank goodness. But it's all starting to unravel and come on out. Now, as you know, yesterday, former acting CIA Director Michael Morell, who was a Clinton ally, is basically saying, no, there is no evidence of any collusion between Trump and Russia. There is no evidence supporting that Trump dossier. It's just, there's no more there than there was on Rachel Maddow's income tax return story. It's all hype. It's all a light show. There's nothing there. And now we're starting to see key Democratic officials are worried that this is all going to start falling apart, and it's going to backfire, and it's harming the brand, which has suffered tremendously during last year's primary season and election. And key Democratic officials are now sending out the message to the Democratic base, don't get your hopes up. There may not really be evidence of Trump and Russia doing anything together, and they're trying to get everybody's expectations pulled back because, of course, the liberal Democrats, they're drooling. They've been led to believe that any moment there'll be a smoking gun that will absolutely bring Donald Trump down. And the Democratic leadership is now starting to say, no, not really here. Now, Trey Gowdy is back in Congress, and he's gearing up on a bunch of different investigations, and one is very much in line with Donald Trump's agenda regarding child exploitation, and he had a very moving speech about the effect that some of these photos that have surfaced from these investigations are having on him, and basically he's sending out the message. Anybody who tries to interfere with this investigation into pedophilia is going to be called to show up and testify just why it is they seem so opposed to investigating something so heinous. So Trey is obviously aware that there are some highly placed people who might be compromised by some of this. Which brings us to the story of Ralph Shorty. He's 35 years old. He's an Oklahoma Republican state senator, and he's just been charged with 3 felony counts, including engaging in child prostitution. This is a guy who campaigned on a family as a champion of family values, and he got caught with this teenage boy and drugs, and so obviously he's not going to be a state senator any longer. Over at the BBC, which stands for Brits Buggering Children, 2 more of their media stars, Tony and Julia Wadsworth, are being charged for sexual offenses against children related to 4 children. What is it with these people? What is wrong with these people? It's just insane. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about politics here, and we are looking at the possibility of the Clintons running for political office. Clintons with an S, a plural, because we are hearing that Hillary Clinton is seriously thinking about taking a run for mayor of New York City. At the same time, her daughter Chelsea is apparently considering to run for Kirsten Gillibrand's Senate seat should Kirsten decide to run for president in 2020. So it's kind of like herpes. Irritating as all heck, never really goes away. Now then, George Soros is out there trying to rally the American people against Trump hate. And apparently he has just unveiled his hate incident database that will help law enforcement authorities to track hate crimes committed by Trump supporters. Obviously, hate crimes committed by anti-Trump people, like the people who beat up Michael Savage, and who are still at large, I might add, are not going to be on the list. Soros says he's doing this to restore the democratic America he fell in love with. I thought democracy was the winner of the election becomes the leader, but apparently not in Soros' fevered imagination. And he's admitting there's a bias. He's putting together a database to help law enforcement go after Trump supporters, but not Trump opponents. His bias is just openly on display. Now then, speaking of bias, somebody put up this very bizarre story about how some kids at a school started an after-school Satan club and applied for tax-exempt status, and they got it in 10 days from the IRS. And I don't know the circumstances about the club. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be, oh, Satan, it's Satan. Well, as Mark Twain used to say, you know, we haven't heard his side of the story. And any man who for untold millennium has maintained the imposing role of religious head of 3/4 of the human population and political head of the whole of it must have executive ability, and maybe it's due a little rehabilitation out there. But this is a prelude to a story that came on out at TaxProf, basically saying we are now at day 1,408 on the IRS scandal of abusive targeting against conservative groups, Tea Party groups, paperwork, audits, all kinds of harassment. And remember, when they investigated, they wanted the records about how this all came about. And Lois Lerner's hard drive, oh my goodness, the dog ate my hard drive, and golly gee shuckies, we don't know what happened to the backups. And that's how that thing ended. And the corporate media gave the IRS a pass on this. You know, it's okay when the Democrats use the IRS to go after their enemies. Or maybe the corporate media is in such tax trouble itself it doesn't dare kick up a fuss about anything. Speaking of corporate media, everyone's still talking about Rachel Maddow's Big Nothing Burger. There are all kinds of spoofs and parodies popping up all over the Internet. A lot of late-night TV shows are making fun of her. And it was a goof. It was a horrendous, horrendous goof. It was a PR stunt. It's backfired. And Rachel's just going to have to deal with that. Or maybe not, because Rachel Maddow is out there tweeting that it's the fault of her viewers. It's the fault of her audience. They expected too much. When she released she was going to have these tax, it became a big Internet sensation, and it's all your fault for just hyping this way too much ahead of time. Really? Did you see MSNBC's advertising, the way they just pushed and primed this thing all during the day and just really tried to build the tension? And it was a huge letdown. No, Rachel, it's not the fault of your audience. It's your fault. You are to blame. You made a bad decision, the same way Geraldo Rivera did with Al Capone's underground vault. And you're just going to have to live with that. And blaming your audience is not going to help. If anything, it's going to drive more of your viewers away, and that's going to make it even less likely MSNBC is going to keep you in your current job. Blaming your audience. That is utterly, utterly ridiculous. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And, of course, at this point, I've given up any expectation that I'll ever get a holiday card from Rachel Maddow, or, for that matter, anybody else in the corporate media. They really do hate the independent media, the open Internet, and even the foreign press. In this age of globalism, the one thing they didn't want to go global was the sharing of information. And they hate it because they've lost the ability to lie to the American people and the people of the world with impunity. Now, back when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, it took roughly 30 years to reach a point where half of the American people understood the Warren Report was a cover-up and that there had been a conspiracy to assassinate President John F. Kennedy. Well, that was then, and this is now. And today, because of the independent media and the open Internet, the life expectancy of a government media lie can be clocked with an egg timer, even a little bitty one like this one right here. And so they're going on the attack here. And now we have Senator Jeanne Shaheen is out there accusing Russia Today of being a foreign agent, an agent for Russian propaganda. That's their latest smear. Remember when the Washington Post had that list of websites, including, I am proud to say, my own, that were arms of Russian propaganda. We even made up a humorous coffee mug about that, which you can get at the store if you want. And it was, they had to pull the story back. There was no foundation for it. We're just reporting on what's going on. And what we do here is we're not really in the business of leaking secrets or giving away military information. All we do is we look at what they write and we point out where it doesn't make sense. It isn't logical. Assad is gassing his own people. Really? Why? What's the motive? Well, that's why we know your story is bovine excrement. So, Jeanne Shaheen wants Russia Today America investigated for potentially violating the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Russia Today America is just reporting the news. That doesn't make them a foreign agent. She's angry because Russia Today is reporting stories the U.S. government does not want you to know about. Just like the independent media, but we're not agents of a foreign government. If I am, I'm owed years of back pay at this point. I could buy a Bugatti Veyron with all the money I must be owed by now for being a foreign agent. That's Claire's favorite car, by the way. Here's a good story. I love this one. This shows you just how rabid the Trump haters have gone. Because there was this con artist posed as an Italian businessman, and he managed to convince a left-wing activist who was just desperate to take down Donald Trump, and he conned him out of $9,000 for obviously forged documents claiming to show that Exxon bribed Trump to appoint him Secretary of State. Complete fraud. And this guy fell for it. This Trump hater fell for it, hook, line, and sinker, $9,000, and that's a lot of money. I love it. I just love it. Alrighty, let's talk about the war zones. Things they're not pleasant in much of the world today. The good news is Syrian troops have liberated 8 settlements from ISIS in the last 24 hours. And they're just starting to accelerate. And apparently, according to an article in South Front, ISIS defenses all across Syria seem to be collapsing. Now, remember we had a report a few weeks back where Donald Trump ordered the CIA to suspend all support for the U.S.-backed terrorists. And while I'm still convinced the CIA is probably trying to find some way to get supplies to them, apparently the supplies have been reduced to the point where they're starting to say, to heck with this, and we're getting out. So they have all these victories that they're getting there. And, of course, as is always the case in asymmetric warfare, if you're losing on the battlefield, you go after the civilians. There have been 2 supposed so-called suicide blasts in Damascus that killed at least 31 people. Again, we just have their word that they're suicide fanatics. For all we know, it could be somebody, says, you, Syrian person, come here. I need you to deliver this box of cookies. That's it. There's cookies in here. Don't shake it. And I need you to take it over to my good buddy at the police station or the government office and just drop it off. And when you come back, I'll give you 100 of whatever the currency in Syria is. And they say, okay, I'll take the bomb. And remember the tube bombing in London? And it came on out that before it happened, this security company that was in charge of the security drill that was taking place at the exact same time and place was going through the community of refugees, hiring people to be pretend terrorists and to carry pretend bombs on the train that day. And then, surprise, surprise, the bomb is real. That's how you manufacture a suicide bombing. Now, the U.S. is trying to push back on all of this by claiming Russia's shelling a Syrian village. And both Russia and Syria are saying, no, it is still the U.S. forces who are causing the civilian damage. U.S. is planning to send 1,000 more troops. It's called mission creep. They don't want you to know that they're trying to basically sneak a full-on army in there to grab large chunks of Syria away from Bashar al-Assad. If they can't conquer it, they'll break it up into little tiny pieces. That's the agenda. They want that oil pipeline right of way, and they want Syria under the control of somebody who will do what Washington, D.C. tells them to do. Now, this next story comes under the category, the fog of war, because we have this story about an Israeli missile that was targeting a Syrian missile that was targeting an Israeli jet that was targeting Syria via Lebanon, hit Jordan. Okay? Now, what happened is, apparently Israel sent some warplanes into Syria and hit Syrian military positions, obviously trying to support ISIS. The Syrians shot back. Now, the Syrians are claiming they downed one Israeli warplane and damaged another, forcing them to flee. Israel is saying, well, we just hit targets in Syria, we're not going to tell you where, and of course nobody's shot down any of our airplanes, and by the way, dear American taxpayers, you need to buy us another F-16. So, but the part that you're not going to hear in the corporate media is that this air operation launched by Israel was supporting ISIS. And that is an important point. You know whose side Israel is really on. Now, Hanif Afmar has said Afghanistan highly appreciates Russia's initiative toward a regional consensus in Central Asia to promote partnership. In other words, Russia is taking steps to settle things down, calm things down. That's what Putin's been doing all along. The first Syrian crisis, Putin negotiated with Assad to surrender what was left of his chemical weapons and blunted the U.S. justification to invade Syria. We must invade Syria. He's got sarin gas. Not anymore, he doesn't. It's all gone. And then they tried to fake it that Assad had kept some of his sarin gas with that claim that Assad was gassing his own Alawite supporters with sarin gas right in front of the United Nations chemical weapons inspectors on the very day they arrived. And of course, the part that should be there and isn't was a reason for Assad to do something that stupid. And nobody had that. Basically came back, well, he's Syrian. Those people are crazy. You can't apply rational thought. And then the UN came on out and said, no, it was the U.S.-backed rebels who were doing all of this stuff. Putin has been showing himself to be a global statesman for all these years. He does not want war. He's trying to keep the U.S. wars from growing and escalating and engulfing the entire planet. And more countries, including those of the European Union, are starting to say, you know, Russia's looking really good versus this corrupt and bankrupted Western system that seems to feed on everything around it. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Edwin from Buckinghamshire, Great Britain. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike.
You're on the air.
Mike, you were talking earlier about Europe and Merkel and probably Schultz. And they're pretty much the same. They got just two different names, but they've got the same it's exactly the same as the donkeys and the elephants in America. Up until Trump, they were just the same. They had two different names, but they had the same agenda. And Merkel and Schultz have got the same agenda.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite, I've been listening to you for quite a while, and I agree with 99% of what you say. But it's the Bilderbergers and the banks that control the world as it is at the moment. And until Trump, which I was on all the blogs everywhere, vote for Trump. Whatever you do, you'll save America. And if America's saved, then the Western world will be saved. I'm watching what's going on now. And you're quite correct. He's being overpowered by those he's put around him. But as I said when I phoned in, the problem is that in nearly every area in Western Europe or the West, they've put up two parties, and those two parties have been corrupted. So all we've really got is two different names, but the same ideology.
Well, I think that's a good observation for life as it has been up until last year, because obviously between the victory of Donald Trump, the success of the Brexit vote, the exposure of the very obvious interference in the Scottish independence referendum, and now apparently more information is surfacing about rigging in the Dutch elections that we had earlier this week. People are waking up to what's going on, and if anything, I would say the world is very rapidly spinning out of the control of the Bilderbergers and these other global elitists, and that's why Soros is just hitting the panic button, and he's throwing as much of his and the American taxpayers' money as he can to try and keep this thing going. You're right, they are not going to give up without a fight, but at this point, their odds of actually succeeding and bringing about this liberal paradise New World Order are looking less and less with each passing day. I don't know what the bookies in Las Vegas are saying on this, but we just had some big military airplane fly right over. But as far as Schultz and Merkel, I think probably a lot of people would have a deep visceral satisfaction to see Merkel be brought down, even if Schultz is more of the same, but then Schultz would be coming into office realizing that if he doesn't listen more to the German people and less to the European Union, that he might be a one-term chancellor as well.
Yes, I agree with you, of course, Michael. But my main thrust is that what we have now in the world, this globalism, as they call it, is the setup. It's a setup of the pretend democracy.
Yes.
Oh, you can vote for left or you can vote for right. And you've got in the U.S., I've got many friends in Louisiana and around there, and they say, well, I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican, and I keep my nose out of it when I'm over there, and I say now and again, well, they're pretty much the same. Their itinerary is exactly the same.
Yeah, they are. They're all, for the most part, bought into the New World Order globalist agenda. They're with precious few exceptions. They're all sociopaths with precious few exceptions. They're all corrupted, and that is an ugly reality. But I think what we're looking at here is this push for a global government has created a political climate conducive to a global revolution, and I think the coming collapse of the U.S. government could trigger literally a worldwide renaissance of people in these nations reasserting real democracy and kicking out these fascists masquerading as democratic leadership and say we're going to go back to a model of government where the people, the local regions, just like the early United States, all the power is diffused across the country to the states, to the counties, to the cities, to the people, and that central government is deliberately hamstrung and crippled to keep it pleasant and subservient, and remember that its job is to take care of the people, not the other way around. So, again, tyranny and dictatorship gestate in darkness, but we've broken that darkness. and people are seeing what's happening in front of them.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that people are finally starting to use the cliche, wake up, because the people, the politicians or the politic are playing a con upon the people, not just in the U.S., but globally. They're playing a con trick.
That's what the political class is. They're con artists. That's what it takes to be a politician. You're a con artist. You're a carnival barker. You're a salesman. We have leaders who are making laws about technology they don't even begin to understand, but they have managed to convince the people that somehow they are better and superior and elite, and therefore we're going to let them make decisions about stuff they have no clue about, whether it's the Internet, whether it's vaccines, whether it's product safety, and it really is it's a swindle. And it's second only to that of the private central banks themselves.
I like you very much. Can I say something before I leave, before you let me go?
Yes.
If you had a one-world government,
yes,
where would Solzhenitsyn go?
I love the question, and I don't know, but I'll be very honest. I am absolutely opposed to a one-world government. It would mean the end of social evolution. It would mean the end of all freedom. Because freedoms are granted or allowed by governments out of fear that somebody may leave for a better alternative. Once there's no alternative, there is no restraint on just how tyrannical a government can become. A one-world government would say, oh, it's too crowded, we're going to shove off 2 billion of you into the incinerators, and because we're the government and there's no place else for you to go, you'll just have to go along with that. Anyway, thanks for the phone call, Edwin. We've got to take a break for commercials, and I'm going to have to let you go. Back with another phone call after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the phone lines here. John in Chicago, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How are you, Mike?
I'm doing good.
All right. While you and Claire were filling out your NCAA bracket, you know, the debt ceiling came and went. and the price of silver didn't go anywhere. So that was Tucker Carlson mentioned that last night, and I thought that was pretty interesting when he was talking about Rachel Maddow doing her thing, and he goes, "Oh, by the way, the debt ceiling came and went."
Yeah. I mean, the debt ceiling is a joke. They just keep they just keep ramping it up anyway, and so why make a big deal about it anymore?
Right. No, what I called about quickly is, though, I did hear the laptop story at the top of the hour on the CBS major national network, and it's like, what are they doing, baiting us into talking about it? Where was the laptop stolen? New York. Where's El Chapo? New York. Now, if they asked the Secret Service what was on the laptop, why would they tell them? Oh, the blueprints for Trump Tower were on there. Oh, so it must have been a soldier of El Chapo who got it. You know?
Yeah, you're right. They could be setting it up to say, oh, my goodness, there's been an assassination of Donald Trump, and they got into Trump Tower because they stole. You're right. It does seem a little obvious and heavy-handed. But the part that really...
I just don't think they would say... Yeah, why would they say what's on the laptop specifically? They don't have to.
Yeah, in fact, why even report it? It's an embarrassment to a Secret Service that's already severely humiliated over the last couple of months. You're right.
Exactly.
It does seem a little odd.
All right, and go Northwestern. Come on, you're going to have to root for Northwestern. Sorry. All right, I'll see you, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now then, getting on back to the war zones here, NATO troops to arrive in Estonia. Actually, they showed up today. It's a small contingent, about 130 British servicemen, but it's just a continuation of this very slow, we hope you won't notice, we are starting to garrison all along that eastern part of Europe so we can make stink face at Russia. Now, over on the other side of the world here, China is issuing a warning to Japan. They are saying that there will be a firm response if Japan interferes in the South China Seas, and apparently Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Hua Chunying at a press briefing was responding to Japan's deployment of their largest warship down to that area. And again, it's a lot of tensions. There isn't a whole heck of a lot down there to justify all this hostility, but again, you need to understand that this isn't the real issue. The real issue from the point of view of the United States of America is they have to somehow destroy the yuan, or at least make it off limits for all U.S. allies, to keep everybody using that Federal Reserve note, off of which the Federal Reserve is making a huge profit. And right now, that's almost the only thing holding our economy up. Same thing applies to Russia and the ruble. That's the real agenda here, using warfare or threat of warfare to drag the world back to Bretton Woods. And they don't want to go, because the United States cheated the rest of the world with Bretton Woods. We're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Here, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're talking about how China has basically issued a warning to Japan to back down. Now, we need to go back and look at the history of the region. First of all, there's these very, very tiny islands, which China has been building up. That area of the ocean was called the South China Sea. It was considered Chinese territory before World War II. After World War II, the Allies gave those islands that had been conquered by Japan back to China. The Cairo Convention. And everybody signed that. Now Japan says they want the islands. Well, I'm sorry, Japan, you lost that war. And China got the islands back. But of course, they're trying to make a big deal about the islands as a way to get into a war with China without actually telling you what the real agenda is, which is death to the yuan. Now, obviously, things are very, very tense up in Korea. A Russian senator, Konstantin Kosachev, head of Russia's Federation Council International Affairs Committee, has said that the U.S. refusal to consider a diplomatic approach to North Korea could be disastrous. Tillerson is over there saying, we're not going to talk. The option for war is on the table. And he's thumping his chest, and he's hoping that Kim Jong-un is going to back down. And it may be just a little bit of a bluff going on, because the monkey wrench in the works is the new president of South Korea. Remember, the former president of South Korea, pro-war, pro-U.S., yes, let's go on and do all this stuff. The new president is actually a supporter of the Sunshine Policy. And that was the name that a few years back they had given to this movement to reunify both Koreas. So there wouldn't be a North and South Korea, there would simply be Korea, the way Germany reunified. And they were making great progress toward that until the U.S. stuck its nose in and mucked everything up again. So Tillerson apparently did have a meeting with the new president of South Korea, from which we are hearing absolutely nothing. And apparently his first communications with the Chinese representatives, we're not even hearing much about that. So it looks to me like Tillerson is not getting support for a war on North Korea from either China or South Korea. Now, China has got very good reason to want to head off a war in North Korea, because they know that ultimately they're the real target. And it's hoping that by starting a war in North Korea right on China's border, that they'll be able to just flip on over the way the war in Vietnam sort of flipped all across the border over to Laos. Okay. All right. Well, we're going to put Korea on hold here, because the lovely Lady Claire has got a bunch of stuff that she wants to talk about it. But I will make one more comment here. Actually, two more that I know Claire's not going to be talking about. The SWIFT system, the International Electronic Banking System, has cut all of the remaining links to North Korea. So North Korea is now broken off from global banking. What a horrible, horrible, horrible thing. Not really. North Korea just broke free of the private central bankers. That's actually going to be a good thing. And a little bit of an embarrassment, or somebody's covert plot got uncovered, but apparently a couple of U.S. troops stationed in South Korea have been arrested carrying $12 million worth of crystal meth. And apparently it was 9 pounds, and they smuggled it from California to South Korea using the Army's Postal Service. Now, were they just going to get insanely rich? Or was the CIA once again engaged in drug running for a fast profit that doesn't have to be reported to Congress, or to destabilize a country? Because it has occurred many, many times in history where a government will intentionally flood another country or even areas of their own country with drugs to suppress a given population. When the CIA was bringing all this heroin back into the United States from Vietnam, they were specifically targeting on the black neighborhoods. Same thing with the cocaine that was being brought up during Iran-Contra. Gary Webb covered a lot of this in his book, Dark Alliance, that the illegal drugs were being targeted on the black neighborhoods to keep those people subordinate, keep them under control. All right, so I'm going to put Korea on hold until hour number 3, because Claire is nagging me over the cell phone. All right, getting on back to Israel, they have once again sent warplanes to bomb the heck out of the Gaza Strip. And if you've ever looked at a map, there isn't much there. It's a very, very small place, and everybody hears the bombs. And as usual, Israel's excuse is somebody fired a rocket from the Gaza Strip into an empty piece of dirt that caused no damage and no injuries. It's a repeating pattern. Every time Israel wants to prove how butch they are by bombing Gaza, which has no air defense weaponry whatsoever, some Israeli agent fires off a bottle rocket into an empty dirt lot. And that's it. They go on in with the weapons. I think this is Israel's giving the finger to the United Nations for the apartheid report. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. It is amazing how Israel's government does behave like spoiled children, but then that's hardly unique to the government of Israel, I would say. Now, George Soros apparently is mucking around in Macedonia. The government is in the middle of a meltdown, and apparently Soros has spent millions of dollars funding these violent protests and riots. He's trying to incite civil war and bring down the current government of Macedonia. Now, the government of Macedonia was trying to eject Soros and his NGOs out. So, in effect, there really is a war already going on between the government of Macedonia and George Soros, who I should point out is not Macedonian. But if they take over Macedonia, this heightens the tensions with Russia. In fact, it's even in this article that Soros' move seems designed to create a military conflict with Russia. Remember what I was saying when we were talking about China? The real agenda at the top of all of this is to rid the world of the yuan and the ruble and force everybody to go back to doing global trade and banking with that U.S. dollar. That's it. It's an argument over whose piece of paper and colored ink everyone's going to use for the next 100 years, and for that argument, the U.S. government is willing to send 1 million of your children to be killed and crippled. Because after all, that's what they're there for. It's not like we really care about them. They're just here to be used. Now, speaking of the debt ceiling, like that caller mentioned, article over in Government Slaves, the debt ceiling deadline is passed, and now the biggest test of Donald Trump's presidency begins. Because they're operating in the red. Now, that's not unusual, because a few years back, there was a bill that said, we're just going to suspend the debt ceiling. There's no use pretending that we can get this borrowing under control, so we're going to suspend the debt ceiling, and at the end of this term, which passed this last week, we will set the debt ceiling at whatever the debt happens to currently be. And that didn't work. They're already over it. And Congress is saying they may not actually get around to debating the new debt ceiling until sometime in the autumn. So instead of having a single debate over a debt ceiling, each new spending measure is going to get its own individual debate in the House of Representatives, where all revenue measures originate. Now, here's an interesting story. Apparently, Janet Yellen has been dodging questions about why they raised the prime rate at a time when all the economic indicators are looking down. And Time magazine put out a transcript of her press conference, and it was a roundabout long answer involving, profitability and so forth and so on. But when you distill it all down, The reason they raised the rates at a time when the economic indicators are down is to fight wage inflation. That was the term she used. We need to fight wage inflation. In other words, keep wages and salaries down. Keep people poor. Keep the workers whose labor actually created the wealth of the nation from sharing in that wealth. Keep the workers from sharing the benefits of America's rising productivity. And right there on full display is the big lie of capitalism, that anybody can become wealthy. No, that's simply not true. A large part of the population must be intentionally kept poor to force them to accept the very dirty, dangerous, and onerous jobs that our civilization requires. If everybody were to become a millionaire, who would take out the trash? Who would fix the sewers? Who would bury our dead? Capitalism only works as long as there is an imposed wealth differential, which is what we've been seeing. The problem is the wealth differential has gotten out of control. It's dangerously unstable. But that's what it is. And of course, the process of deciding who is allowed to be rich and who is kept poor, that's what politics is for. Think about that one for a while. Anyway, because of that little quarter base point raise, mortgage rates have taken off. It's hitting consumers already. Prices are going up for consumers. Why? We've got to keep you poor. If you start getting money, you might actually get this uppity idea that you should be running the country. Remember, every tyranny in history has deliberately destroyed the middle class, because it is from that middle class that opposition to oligarchy arises. That was true in the French Revolution. It was true in the American Revolution. The Soviets designed a society that by default never had a middle class, which is why they survived as long as they did. But that's a hallmark of a growing dictatorship, the deliberate takedown of the middle class, the crushing down of everybody who is not part of the elite into just bare survival poverty to keep you all helpless, to keep you under control. Now, the reality is in this country, Yellen doesn't need to worry about wage inflation. The rich are not creating enough jobs in the U.S. to save the situation. And because of this loss of the wealth recycling mechanism, remember I talked about it, if all the money's up at the top of the pyramid, the economy locks up. And there has to be a system where some of that money gets brought back down as decent wages and salaries for workers to pump back into the economy. Fascism removes that recycling mechanism. And that's where we are right now. And as a result, as our manufacturing declines, as our ability to be consumers declines, the balance of economic power is shifting to the east, to the countries that are manufacturing superpowers. That's where these nations' greatness is really going to be measured. Not how many weapons they have, not how many troops they have, not how powerful their weapons are, but how much they can manufacture and sell. Agricultural goods, washing machines, laptop computers, commerce, peace through commerce. Now, experts are saying that U.S. shale oil output growth will not bring down oil prices for long. Actually, the shale oil has been a disaster on several fronts. None of these shale oil operations are producing anywhere near the volume of oil and gas that everybody said that they were going to. They keep cutting back those estimates. The Monterey Shale Formation, I think they've already cut it back 1/3. Overall across the nation, it's already cut by more than half. It's not penciling out. During that misguided oil price war with Russia, many fracking companies went out of business. And apparently many more in Europe are going into bankruptcy right now as I speak. And what we have left behind are all those dead fracking wells leaking methane and fracking fluid into the farm soil. into lakes, streams, rivers, ponds, and our drinking water supply. It was a classic case of let's do what we're going to do right now to get rich, and we don't care what the long-term costs are. And those of us who are having to live with those long-term consequences know how bad that turned out to be. Whether it's fracking, Deepwater Horizon, Fukushima. All right, we're going to grab a phone call. Steve in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I was just trying to figure out, unless Donald Trump is just being presidential and meeting with people, I was kind of curious why he'd be meeting with Chancellor Merkel. I assume, unless there's fraud involved, she would be on her way out. Germany's going to get rid of her, I would assume, don't you think? Yeah,
but don't forget, an incoming president, there's sort of a process where you go and you do meet these other foreign heads of state, whether it's Putin or Theresa May, and obviously Germany being a major focus for the European Union. I think if Trump had not met with Merkel, it would have been seen as an insult.
Fair enough, fair enough. Hey, thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Guess, clothing store, is shuttering 60 underperforming U.S. stores. People aren't buying those designer jeans with the fancy stitching on the pockets anymore. They're just getting ordinary blue jean work pants. Just as durable, in fact, even more so, just they're not stylish. I remember years ago when I was still in Los Angeles. In fact, it's a weird thing to anchor it to. It was during the congressional hearings into Iran-Contra, because I had a radio there. And I got involved doing a little bit of work, processing work, for this bizarre lawsuit between Jordache and Nakash, who were rival jean companies. And there was this huge multi-million-dollar lawsuit claiming that one company had stolen a stitching design pattern from the other company, or copied it. Intellectual property, little tiny thing. And the law firm was Jones Day, Reeves and Pogue. And I remember sitting there and just thinking about literally the millions and millions of dollars being poured into this argument over a stitching pattern on the back pocket of blue jeans. And I could look out the window of the building down on the streets of Los Angeles and see, even back then, all the hungry and homeless people. And it just, I didn't stay with them very long. Let's just put it that way. Gordman's is laying off 600 staffers. Apparently they're either in or going into bankruptcy. The whole economy is locking up because all the wealth is right at the very, very top. Janet Yellen just guaranteed it's not going to come back down to ordinary Americans. Got to keep you poor, got to keep you helpless. And there aren't enough rich people to buy all the consumer goods. This is why retail's in trouble. They're trying to blame online sales. No, that isn't. Retailers could recapture the retail market if people had money to spend. Because ordering online is not emotionally satisfying the way a retail experience is. You order online and you have to wait and wait and wait, and you're not exactly sure about what it is you bought until you actually get it. You go into a store, a well-run department store with a wide selection, you go around and you find what you want, you give them your money, and you get to take what you bought home with you that very second. There's a lot of instant gratification there. It's called intermittent reinforcement. It's the same mechanism that can lead you to gambling addiction. And there are people who are addicted to shopping, too. But the retailers have missed that. The real problem is the American people have been plundered and looted. And there's nothing left out here. Nancy Pelosi likes to call herself a champion of minimum wage. Know what she pays her own interns? Nothing. A reporter asked her a question about that, and she lost her cool and just ends the interview. It's like people like Dianne Feinstein who think nobody should have guns, but they're carrying concealed. They really do believe in a two-tiered society. There's the elites who have all the wealth, and they're allowed to have guns and all the privileges, and then there's everybody else that must be controlled, that must be impoverished, that must be groped by TSA, that must be scanned and spied on, because they're scared of us. They're scared out of their minds of the American people. Got to take a break for commercials. When we come on back, we've got a caller waiting on the line. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the telephones here to Mo in Florida. Aloha, Mo. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. I just had I have a question, and if you'll indulge me in an observation and get your opinion. My question is, I guess you say, like, what does Macy's, Target, and Best Buy have in common? What would you say? Besides going bankrupt.
Deteriorating interior finishings, reduced variety. There's a lot of similarities here, but they do sound like, in terms of their demographics, they are the exact opposites. I'm thoroughly disenchanted with Best Buy. In fact, even Office Depot, I had a bad experience with them just yesterday. I walked on in and asked the clerk there in the computer section for an uninterruptible power supply, and he did not have a clue what I was talking about.
No, that's because you're old school.
Thank you for reminding me.
Well, I am too. But the answer is, at least my answer is, they're all Amazon showrooms. So, yes, I think people really do. I mean, I got to be honest, I've done it. I went and bought a food processor and priced it, looked at it, and went to Bed Bath & Beyond and looked at it, and I just got a better price at Amazon or the same price. Yeah, I just sent it to my house. I like it. So, I mean, they're Amazon showrooms, don't you think?
I've never done it that way. If I make the effort of going down to a shopping mall, it's because I want whatever it is I want right the heck now. And certainly in terms of Best Buy, if I'm going down there to buy something, it's because I need it right now, not 2 weeks from now. Remember, I live in Hawaii. It can take up to a month for things sent from that mainland to get here, unless I pay the huge amounts for like FedEx or something, in which case the shipping can cost more than the product itself. But for most of my shopping needs, the need is usually immediate. And again, emotionally, I'm more satisfied going into a store, say, I want that one, here's your money, I take it and I go home. And that to me is the essence of the retail shopping experience, and that's going away because of the loss of variety. You go into a store and it's now 5,000 of the one thing their buyer thought they could convince people to buy.
I forgot. You're in Hawaii. That changes everything. But no, I totally understand that. But my actual observation is this. I know you've hinted around about this, obviously, and other, open-minded free society, free press, whatever, I forget what you call it, the real press.
The independent media.
We are.
The independent media.
The independent media, yeah. Yeah, the independent free media. The free thinkers, the ones that aren't, boxed in. And I think that, I really honestly think, Michael, that Trump needs to go to the people. He needs to, he's got these neocons and, he's got enemies within. He has to be like, here's what I was thinking. I don't want to be too long-winded here because I ain't got other callers. But I was thinking, I was watching some of these old, reenactments with Caesar and Mark Antony and, Octavian, and how they would talk to the troops, get them motivated. And, hey, this guy's he's going against Rome and this and that. And he would get them. Well, Trump's got the bully pulpit. He needs to call some of these people out. He needs to start going after them so the others will squeal. I think he's making a mistake. I think he's being too coy.
He's being too defensive. I agree with you. I agree with you. He's got to stop playing defense, and he's got to start getting out in front, or he's never going to regain control of his own administration. Right now, he is being herded and corralled and constrained by those around him and shoved in the direction they want him to go. And I can't imagine Donald Trump really being happy about that, but he's got to find a way to break out from this. He's got to become more aggressive. He has to stop being a businessman. He has to start being a leader.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you should start by bringing General Flynn back in, saying the whole thing was a ruse.
I agree. I agree. Trump should never have surrendered Flynn. to the other side. That only encouraged them, and now they're going after Sessions, and they're going to go after his administration piecemeal, take it apart from inside. We got to take another break for commercials. Thank you very much for the phone call, Mo. Back with another phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Here we're going to take another phone call from Bob in Las Vegas. Aloha, Bob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I got in a little late in today's show. First, going back to what Mo was saying, the previous caller. See, the problem, I've been wanting to say this a long time. The problem is most of the Trump voters are the productive and working people of this country. We don't have the time to go out in the street like these snowflakes and these crybabies who have no skills, no jobs, and are getting paid to be out in the street. That's the problem. That's the problem with getting Trump supporters and voters out on the street, because we're the productive part of this country.
We have jobs.
Right, exactly. So it's difficult. On the other hand, these snowflakes, these crybabies, these whiners, these people with no skills, and
the
of course
bread
they're
and
paid by the
circusers.
Soros groups to get out there.
I call them the bread and circusers.
Exactly. Mike, I was just in Walmart. I was buying a few things, and I was talking to one of the cashiers, nice young girl from Lebanon. She started there maybe 6 months ago. I did ask her out, but she's married, so one of those things. But, Mike, she said, I was going to go back to Beirut last week, but I decided not to. I said, why? She said, because of Trump. I said, because of Trump? What do you worry about? Lebanon's not on that list. At least I don't think they are, that list of 6 or 7 countries. She said, yes, but I'm Muslim. I said, so? They're not on that list. So obviously she's illegal, and you got a company like Walmart employing her. That's how bad it is.
No, there may be another explanation, because don't forget the corporate media has been saying Donald Trump is banning Muslims, Donald Trump is banning Muslims. She may simply be getting her worldview from corporate media and has bought into that fantasy. And a lot of people, unfortunately, have.
I better tell her to start watching your show. Maybe she'll start doing so and take that trip back to Lebanon. But,
well,
Mike,
I wouldn't suggest that she do that, because we are seeing indications that Israel's getting ready to launch yet another war into Lebanon at this point. So she's probably better off just staying right where she is.
Mike, you really get to know your neighbors. In listening to your show. I listen to your show outside in the morning before it starts getting hot, and maybe the volume's a little loud. I have it on the iPad, and the one neighbor said to me, "Who is this guy? He is great. I was listening to him, in the morning, and he's fantastic." Okay, and the other neighbor, who I thought had a left tilt, said, "Who is that obnoxious guy you listen to in the morning?"
Okay, so wait a minute. So that's 1 for and 1 against. So I guess I'm still doing about average here.
Don't worry, I'm spreading the word.
I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Getting on back to the news here. As you know, this debate regarding health care is continuing. And I think that Ross Perot really had the best idea. Let's look at a country that has a good health care system that takes care of their people and doesn't cost a fortune, and let's just do what they do. But unfortunately, this new package that is being created, Ryan Care, or Obamacare Light, it's turning out to be a complete fraud because it's still pandering to those health insurance corporations who crafted the original Affordable Care Act, or we should call it the Unaffordable Care Act. And apparently, Ryan's replacement for Obamacare will add $1.1 trillion to the federal deficit over the next decade, and it reforms exactly nothing. And apparently a lot of people are starting to say this is not really a solution. Now, the health bill did pass the committee by just 1 vote. And apparently there are a lot of Republicans who are not on board with this right now, because it isn't really a fix to the problem. It's an attempt to resell you the same scam all over again by putting it in a new wrapper. And sometimes that will work, sometimes it won't. I'll give you a good example of repackaging. A movie that was called Twinkle Twinkle Killer Kane. And it came on out, was an absolute disaster. And they figured out what was wrong was the name turned people off. It It was re-released under a new name, Ninth Configuration, and yes, they did a re-edit on it. It was a great film. So what they're doing, they're trying to do, is they're taking Obamacare, they're moving it around, they're making a few small cosmetic changes, they're putting a new name and a new branding on it and putting it out there and hoping that you'll say, oh, this is new and improved, therefore we'll sign on to it. Be very, very, very careful about that. Because Ross Perot is right. The best approach is look at what other countries have done in terms of health care that really makes their population healthy at a reasonable cost. And let's just do what they're doing. Chris Matthews, apparently, when he's out there trying to still defend Obamacare and say, we shouldn't change it, we should keep it the way it is, came on out Tuesday, said on his show there's no real individual mandate to purchase health insurance under Obamacare. Really? What do you think all those IRS penalties are if you don't have such a policy? What's going on here, of course, is a war between the Democratic-leaning health insurance corporations who are getting rich on Obamacare and those GOP-leaning health insurance corporations who expect to start getting a little bit more of the money under the Ryan Care program. They're just, all that's really changing is, who's getting the largesse. Now, here is something to keep in mind. Prior to 1973, it was actually illegal in the United States to profit off of health care. Health providers were supposed to be service organizations, and they were supposed to run close to nonprofit to keep costs down. And then good old Richard Nixon signed the Health Maintenance Organization Act of 1973. It created the idea of an HMO, and it allowed health industry to become a for-profit operation. They even incentivized the focus on constant treatment of symptoms versus an outright final cure. This all goes back to Richard Nixon. It's all his fault. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Eric from Chicago. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. First-time caller, long-time listener. I would like to know why Trump is getting involved in Syria. It's just the same policy of the last two administrations.
A lot of people are a lot of people are asking that. In fact, it looks like he's ramping it up, and I think Trump has been convinced by the neocons that unless he continues this war policy that General Wesley Clark blew the whistle on all those years ago, that the U.S. is going to collapse. And obviously, as president, he doesn't want the nation to collapse while he's sitting in that center seat. And he's been convinced that we have to move forward with this conquering of the world's resource-rich areas and shackling them to the U.S. dollar. And unfortunately, he's fallen for that, and partly because it's actually true. If the U.S. does not continue on this policy of military conquest and overthrow of the resource-rich areas of planet Earth in order to get them to trade those resources only for the U.S. dollar, then yes, this country's economy is going to implode, the Wall Street will implode, and it'll take the federal government with it. And so obviously, given a choice between continuing the war agenda and being the president who allowed the United States to dissolve on his watch, I can understand, I don't agree with, but I can understand why Trump is, allowing himself to be sent down that particular primrose path. My concern is that it doesn't really matter. We're ultimately going to lose all these wars. We can't get out of Afghanistan. We can't get out of Iraq. We're still stuck thrashing around in Syria after, going on 6 years. We've been in Afghanistan longer than any other war. We're still thrashing around in Yemen. And they really think they can take on North Korea, China, and Russia and possibly have a civil war at home? I really don't think so. I mean, the last idiot who tried to do a foreign war and a civil war at the same time was King John, I think. And it did not work out very well for him.
Well, I'm going to pray for peace. Thank you very much for your answer.
Absolutely. Prefer to have peace. Peace through commerce. Unfortunately, everybody has to agree to have peace. It takes only one fanatic with a bomb to keep the war going. And it's very scary to consider that the future of our entire world is in the hands of whichever world leader is the least mentally stable, especially when you look at the lineup and realize just how many of them really should be fitted for a straitjacket at this point. Okay, now then, getting on to immigration, the refugee crisis. Chavez is slamming the Ninth Circus Court of Appeals for their ruling blocking Trump's travel ban, saying that Trump was given the authority by Congress. It's in Title VIII. The president is allowed by proclamation to say this category of immigrants are temporarily banned until I say so. That's the letter of the law. And the Ninth Circus Court of Appeals was exceeding their authority. They were literally making up things out of thin air and simply saying, oh, it's unconstitutional, without explaining why it's unconstitutional, when in point of fact there is nothing in the Constitution that grants citizens of foreign governments any right of immigration to the United States of America. And the Supreme Court has ruled repeatedly, the Constitution of the United States of America does not apply to foreign nationals. Now, apparently, a bill has been introduced into the House Judiciary Committee to split up the Ninth Circus Court of Appeals, given their record of extremely bizarre, liberally biased decisions in the past. Now, Tennessee is getting ready to challenge federal refugee policy, citing the 10th Amendment, and saying that the 10th Amendment prohibits the federal government from messing about with a state choosing to protect its own borders. If Tennessee succeeds, I imagine that Arizona would go back to the courts over that whole issue. Now, interestingly enough, the governor and the attorney general of Tennessee are not on board with this. This is a private lawsuit being brought up by the Thomas More Law Center. And they're filing the suit on behalf of the General Assembly. And the law firm is doing it for free, pro bono. Now, as you know, there are a lot of illegal immigrants in this country. They are now running scared because of Trump's wanting to reimpose reasonable restrictions on immigration and citizenship to this country. And so they're starting to flock to the border with Canada. All of a sudden, Canada's dealing with an issue of illegals coming across into Canada. It's Canada's turn for the illegal immigrant flood. Now, right now, Justin Trudeau is on board with letting the refugees in and everything. I wonder how he's going to feel after a few million illegal immigrants from Central America show up on his doorstep. Start applying for Canada's very generous social welfare system. Down in Sydney, Australia, very, very bizarre story. Apparently, students as young as 5th grade who are Muslim refugees have been threatening to behead their teachers. And the teachers are so concerned that this is a genuine threat, one of them actually quit, saying they couldn't deal with the constant violent behavior, the threats of beheading. Apparently these Muslim children are threatening other children into reading the Quran and converting. And, of course, we saw exactly the same behavior from the Catholics when they were over in the Middle East trying to convert all those people at the point of a sword. So now it's coming back the other way. And I'd like to insert a comment here at this point. One of the reasons why I am not a believer in any God or gods is, if there were really any kind of a God or gods who could communicate the reality of their experience to the minds of human beings, there would not be anybody pointing swords at each other saying, you have to believe my God and not yours. There wouldn't be any need for missionaries. The missionaries would have shown up here on the island of Hawaii, and the native Hawaiians would have said, oh, we already know about God and Jesus and everything. Have a coconut. The fact that religion is imposed by force, by war, by pogrom, by inquisition, is one of the strongest arguments that it's all just completely made-up nonsense. It's just another system of control to keep you in line, to keep you rendering unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. Tensions over in Europe are beginning to climb a little bit. Apparently, an ex-European Union diplomat, Corrado Biroli, is out there saying Brexit was the last straw. The EU has run out of patience with Great Britain, saying that Britain's attitudes towards Europe haven't changed since Winston Churchill was in charge. Well, maybe Britain is still holding a grudge for all the times European countries like Spain, France, and Germany tried to invade. Ever stop to think that maybe Britain's memory of Europe isn't all sunshine and daffodils? French wines? Anyway. Apparently over in Dunkirk, there's a huge migrant camp. 5 months ago, it was torn down and raised. It's back up again. 1,500 refugees, all trying to get to Great Britain. And they're hiding out in trucks and any way that they can get through that Channel Tunnel. And apparently they're going to tear that one down again. Soros has started a mess that is going to be extraordinarily difficult and costly to undo. Probably laughing at himself. Now, according to a British member of Parliament, Tommy Shepherd, he's saying that the new push for Scottish independence isn't, in fact, going to lead to Scotland's reunification with the European Union, but in point of fact, an independent Scotland is more likely to seek cooperation with Russia. There's a lot of countries in Europe who might want to actually do that. Now, Theresa May has basically put a stop on the second Scottish independence referendum, saying now is not the time. And she is saying it's not appropriate for now because we're already going through this huge change in terms of Brexit, and once that's over and done with, then maybe we'll have another independence referendum. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and I'm getting emails and messages in the little chat window here. And I think at this point, a lot of us who supported Donald Trump have to admit that we're very disappointed, especially in terms of the war agenda. And logically, I can understand why Trump is allowing himself to be moved along in this direction, because he sees it as an either-or choice. Either we continue the wars or the U.S. will collapse. We've gone too far, we can't turn around and go back. And that may be accurate, but it is disappointing, especially when he campaigned on non-intervention and peace. I'm still glad that Donald Trump won the election. We unfortunately voted for the lesser of two evils. And that's exactly what we got. And I still shudder at the thought that Hillary Clinton is still trying to run for elected office, and I feel sorry for the people of New York if she wins there. But I think it also underscores that what we're dealing with here is more than the president, that we perhaps put too much importance on the president. And we need to realize that everything that we're seeing, the economic predations on the American people, the war agenda, the corruption, the dangerous vaccines, GMO, and the rest of it, it's a systemic problem. It's the federal government as a whole. And I'm still convinced it's heading for a Soviet Union-style collapse. We're going to take a phone call here. Brent in Wisconsin. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, good afternoon, Mike. Thank you for taking my call. I was kind of surprised twice, probably in the last month or so. I've heard you quote a piece of scripture, once to that gentleman from New Jersey, I believe, and just the last couple minutes, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's.
I think it's Romans 13, isn't it?
Well, it may be. I'm not. I know the Bible, but I don't know verse and book and things like that. But the rest of that scripture is, and render unto God that which is God's.
Well,
my question is,
it makes a lot of sense.
What belongs to God?
It makes a lot of sense when you realize that most of the Bible as we know it today, most of the New Testament as we know it today, was crafted by Romans at the Council of Nicaea. And just like any other organized religion, it was crafted to be a means to allow the Roman government to control its population. And that's why that little proviso was in there. But as far as what belongs to Caesar and what belongs to God, I would say that that's probably up to the individual to decide.
Well, I would say everything belongs to God. The same Bible says he owns all the cattle on 1,000 hills and the gold and silver therein.
Well,
so that doesn't leave much for Caesar, I don't think.
He doesn't own my cell phone. This is my cell phone. I paid for it. This is my cell phone. God does not own my cell phone. Anyway, thanks an awful lot for the call. We're coming up on our station identification, and I need to let you go. And when we come on back from station identification, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us for the weekly dose of clarification. So we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 3. And as you can see on the BAM user feed, I am joined by the lovely Lady Claire. And Lady Claire, what is the first? Oh, and you're green. You're
of course.
St. Patrick's Day green.
Of course, and I want to wish everyone out there a lovely St. Patrick's Day. The first thing I'd like to talk about is what's going on in North Korea. And all I can think about is that line from Apollo 13, Houston, we've got a problem. The problem is that Tillerson is attempting to negotiate with what is, in essence, a caretaker government because their president got impeached. You know, President Park.
There's an interim president who's very much opposed to war.
Yeah.
In fact, he's one of the people who wanted reunification.
Yeah.
And he's got the job until their elections, which are in May.
May 9th, to be precise.
I can't imagine any interim government that's going to be in power for that short a time would want to commit the nation to war.
Yeah. I mean, talk about lousy timing. And there was... The other thing that we need to look at is there's this massive military South Korean, U.S., Japanese set of drills, naval drills. But they end again before the South Korean election takes place, and those guys are probably going to be brought home unless the U.S. just makes a point of keeping them all there, hoping to kind of rattle the incoming South Korean government into doing something stupid.
I would not. I would not put that out of reach. If they think there's a chance that the South Korean elections can be rigged to put a war hawk in as the new South Korean president, then yes, they'll keep all those forces over there in the Western Pacific.
Yeah.
Now, obviously for Japan, that's local neighborhood anyway. They could sail back to Japan and then be back off the coast of North Korea in just a few days.
Right.
For the American forces, it's a little bit different, obviously.
Yeah, it's a lot different. And I have to wonder if President Trump will give that executive order if Tillerson just doesn't quite get what he thought he was going to, which I think would have been a blank check to go in and just go in and start bombing the DPRK like crazy.
Well, we're getting the pushback from the interim South Korean president, and apparently there's pushback coming from Beijing as well.
Yeah.
That is very concerned about a war in North Korea spilling into China, the way the U.S. war in Vietnam spilled into Cambodia and Laos.
Yeah.
See, the United States has a bad history of not confining their wars within borders, but just, we're going to go to war with Japan, and, we'll do Germany at the same time.
Yeah, and...
I mean, look at World War I. That war actually broke out between Serbia and Austria-Hungary, and somehow Germany became the target.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see what commentary comes from Tillerson's visit to Beijing, which is supposed to happen, I think, tomorrow. So it will be interesting if there is any joint communique that gets issued.
Well, if Tillerson does not get what he wants, I imagine the corporate media will find something else to talk about, like whatever Kim Kardashian is up to today.
Yeah. And there was an image in one of the news blogs I saw, and it said, sirens blare as Japan, fearing North Korea, holds first missile test drill to keep their people safe and to get them to shelter. Yeah. And they had
duck and cover.
Yeah, duck and cover. And they had these just amazingly precious, beautiful Japanese kids, just looking with this look of fear on their faces. And I thought, what intelligent person would put a child through that without having some comforting adult be there? I mean, why are they trying to get these kids so scared, Mike?
Because fear is a great controller of the population, and obviously the media photographs are out there to send the message. Japan is afraid of North Korea.
Yeah. But I wanted to reach out through the computer and just hug those kids and say, okay, you know, let's give you a little bit of comfort. Let's give you a little bit of reassurance that the adults in the room in Japan are going to be able to keep you safe. But I didn't get that from that image whatsoever.
Well, again, it's all propaganda, and the reference to duck and cover, of course, is acknowledging the fact that all of that campaign that we went through as when we were kids, Bert the Turtle, Duck and Cover, and all of that, it was a gigantic bluff. And the people who made that film knew that all of the suggestions in it to survive a nuclear attack were never going to work.
No.
I especially remember the one where the family's outside having a picnic, and there's a flash of light, and they pull the picnic cloth over their head, and they're going to be safe.
Like that's going to work.
Like that's going to have anything to do with it. And the whole point of that propaganda campaign was to convince Americans that nuclear wars were survivable, to try and push back against the growing outcry against these very horrific weapons being developed and deployed. Most of the photos taken of the aftermath of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were classified. Some of them still are. The government didn't really want Americans to know just how horrible the use of nuclear weapons is. Now, we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. But I think one of the problems we're facing right now is it has been a long time since there's been a nuclear explosion that anybody could actually witness. Certainly it's been a long time since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And again, I'd like to point out that for all this talk about Saddam's nuclear weapons and Iran's nuclear weapons and North Korea's nuclear weapons, there is only one nation on Earth that has ever actually used a nuclear weapon of mass destruction against the civilians of another country, and that is, of course, the United States of America. But with the banning of above-ground testing, we're now in the middle of a generation where, for most people, the idea of an atomic bomb in a mushroom cloud is an abstraction. They've seen it on TV and movies. They don't really have a visceral connection to just how horrible it is. And this goes back to what I was saying about the attitude of Europeans towards a new world war versus attitude of Americans toward a new world war. For Americans, it's an abstraction. The last war we had on our own soil was the Civil War, and with the exception of a few carefully maintained battlefields and memorials, it's pretty much vanished. But you go to Europe, and you can still see the scars from the first two world wars all over. The remains of the trenches are still in parts of France. There are still places in Europe where whole city blocks are still walled off because there's a 2,000-pound bomb sitting in there, and they're just going to sit and wait until it blows up, and then they'll go in and rebuild. And so for the people of Europe, that horror of war is a present memory. They see the remains of it all around them. We don't have that in America, and that's unfortunately why so many Americans are so easily swayed to this idea of maybe another new world war. It's not like it's going to be on my front lawn.
Yeah, I remember that on a college abroad trip I took to Europe and Germany and Munich, and there were areas that were like no man's land.
Yeah, they're just walled off. It's just a big wall off. And when I was working in Milan and in Munich, I saw exactly the same thing. And out in the countryside away from the cities, there are still buildings, the remains of churches, cathedrals, factories that have never been repaired. They're just left there, and some of them are designated as historical monuments, and others are they're just there. You can't get away from it.
Now, Mike, I'd like your opinion on this. Kim Jong-un, what do you think he's actually going to do between now and the South Korean election in May? Do you think he's going to lay low, or do you think he's going to test more missiles? Where do you think he's going to go on that?
I think he's going to test more missiles. He's out there trying to create an image of North Korea as an enemy that you don't want to mess with. And going back to the experience of the Korean War, there is some merit to that. The terrain is very, very difficult, and you would think the United States would have learned from Vietnam, you cannot win a war entirely from the air. You've got to go in on the ground, and once you do that, North Korea has the home court advantage.
Oh, and I've got something to share with you on that that's happening right here on Oahu.
Oh?
The Army is reinstituting and refocusing on jungle warfare.
Okay.
There's a unit right here that is practicing and experiencing, and I don't know, call me silly, it just doesn't seem that this is something that the U.S. government would be doing if they were planning on intelligent, long-term, good faith, tough negotiations.
No, they're not. No, the agenda of the U.S. government is we're going to conquer the world and make them like us and make them use our currency. And without giving away any details, of course, this last week we're just hearing all this heavy military aircraft taking off and flying overhead. And again, I'm not going to put out any details, but it's obvious that there is a definite escalation in the amount of activity going on around here.
And one of the things I wanted to find out, I mean, Tillerson has said that he will not negotiate with North Korea before they denuclearize. But this was a no-go from the beginning, and Tillerson had to know that.
Of course he did. Of course he did. Tillerson, unfortunately, is starting to adopt the Israeli method of negotiation, which is you give us everything we want first, and then maybe down the road we'll think about doing something nice for you. And it hasn't worked for Israel. It's a way of trying to pretend that you're interested in negotiations while at the same time making sure nothing can ever happen from them. And again, the United States does not see any advantage to peace in North Korea, or we wouldn't even be over in that part of the ocean to begin with. The goal here is to start kicking up tensions in that part of the world, leading to an eventual war with China.
Now, do you think it's possible that the U.S. is contemplating a false flag to look like it might have come from North Korea, get close enough to Japan that Japan is starting to feel very threatened, or South Korea, and try to get things kicked off that way, particularly if China does not give Tillerson what he wants?
Well, absolutely. Now, first of all, I don't think any of the leaders of any of these countries are going to be fooled by a false flag because they're experienced enough to know this is how these things operate. But we've almost seen them telegraph this idea that North Korea will fire on one of our warships. And remember, there was an earlier attempt to start a war with North Korea when a South Korean ship, the Cheosan, was torpedoed and sunk. And they came on out and said, had to be a North Korea torpedo, you know, no other way. And they showed the blueprint of the torpedo that the North Koreans are using, and then they brought the remains of the torpedo that sank the Cheosan. And people actually took a very close look at it and saw, no, they were not the same at all. And so that attempt to frame North Korea kind of fizzled, but it shows a willingness to use a false flag and frame North Korea. And again, from this point in our history, we look back on the lies about Saddam's nuclear weapons, the lies about Iran's nuclear weapons, the lies about Saddam's gas, the lies about the Lusitania not smuggling weapons to Great Britain, the torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. This is how the United States government will sell you a war. There will be a false flag. There'll be a torpedo or a missile that comes out of who knows where, and it will damage a U.S. warship, possibly even sink it. And in order to get the war going. Remember, Roosevelt set up the ships down there in Pearl Harbor to be sunk to get the United States into the war against Nazi Germany. And so presidents will think along that line. Pentagon will think along that line. Everybody's trying to make a big deal out of North Korea's nuclear weapons and long-range missiles. They could fire a missile, a sub-launch missile from right off the coast of North Korea and say, oh my goodness, North Korea's fired a nuclear missile, and they could have it go off and leave a mushroom cloud where tourists can get pictures of it and just kick it off that way. Anything is possible. But again, the reason that North Korea wants nuclear weapons is because they remember the Korean War, where U.S. bombers killed 30% of the entire population of North Korea. And they don't want to have to go through that again. The whole point of having nuclear weapons is to be a deterrent. This push by the United States to get everybody on planet Earth to give up their nuclear weapons, except, of course, for the United States, is to render the rest of the world vulnerable and unable to deter an invasion.
It looks like that's the long-term plan. Mike, if you were taking Vegas odds on this, when do you think that such a false flag might happen? Do you think it's going to coincide with the end of that massive exercise, the naval exercise?
Well, I think it's fluid. Before we started seeing indications of a pushback from the interim South Korean president and from China, I would have said any second now. But if South Korea is not going to go along with this until the May elections, a false flag might force their hand.
Yes.
And so there might, in fact, be a missile strike into South Korea itself,
Ouch.
Blamed on North Korea.
Oh.
And that would certainly convince the interim government to go along with the declaration of war, even though they themselves will be gone after May.
Yeah, and the finishing and the making operational of the THAAD missiles, right?
As far as I know, all it takes to make them operational is to flip on the power switch.
Okay, all right.
But I want to make a point here, that everyone's making a big deal about the THAAD missiles, but the THAAD missiles are a defensive system.
Yeah.
Okay, they are designed to hit very high altitude ballistic missiles that are coming on in. A lot of people have said that THAAD is actually a violation of the ABM Treaty. But THAAD is not an offensive weapon. South Korea cannot fire THAAD missiles into North Korea and cause horrendous amounts of damage. They don't carry nuclear warheads. Their conventional warheads are only large enough to destroy another missile, to create a shrapnel cloud to hit that other missile coming on in. So they're not weapons of offense.
And China has been kind of not very happy about the THAAD deployment. And did you mention that they have taken other steps to make sure that the THAAD deployment may not succeed?
Well, I would assume that probably at this point Russia and China are cooperating on the development of their electronic warfare systems, which we saw very aptly demonstrated in the Black Sea with the USS Donald Cook, that was just absolutely paralyzed by a single Russian electronic warfare aircraft. The word we're getting is that China has already developed a system that can paralyze the radar system for the THAAD, so that if this jammer is used at the same time an attack is being carried out, THAAD will be paralyzed and unable to stop it.
And the U.S. military has no counter to that?
Not at this time. Not at this time.
Oh, boy. Yeah. Well, I would love to hope that cooler heads will prevail, but unfortunately earlier this week at the Daily Mail, they had an article talking about the U.S. wanting to take out the North Korean government and completely decapitate it. And I thought, could they be yelling this any more loudly, you know?
Well, that would be one way to deal with North Korea and minimize the risk of there actually being a missile firing or even the use of a nuclear weapon, is a lightning decapitation strike at Kim Jong-un and his top military commanders.
Right.
They certainly did a lot of that in Baghdad during the big Iraq war. They went in and they targeted the command centers and the leadership. It sets a bad precedent, however, because it opens up other countries to do similar things to our leadership. And that might actually work out to be a good thing, because in the good old days, kings would ride into battle at the head of their own army.
Right.
And so they faced the risk of being killed and crippled along with their men. Then war got civilized, and our war leaders got to sit back home in very comfortable bunkers and send other people's children out to die. And I think if that risk of being a casualty of war themselves was brought back to the leadership, it might actually induce them to say, this might not be such a good idea after all.
Yeah, I have to wonder about that. It's sort of leading from behind, is it not?
It is leading from behind and protecting your leadership. And from a military point of view, that does make more sense in terms of protecting your chain of command. But if the U.S. really does try a decapitation strike against the North Korean leadership, it sets a dangerous precedent. Even worse, if they try it and fail, then the whole world is going to see that it was the United States and its allies that started this whole fracas. And geopolitically, it is very important that it be made to look like North Korea struck the first blow, which is why I think they're going to go with a false flag.
Okay, so you think that's more of a possibility?
I think that's much more likely. It's the same thing with Roosevelt and Pearl Harbor. Roosevelt spent all of 1941 goading the Japanese into an attack so that he could present it to the American people as a surprise attack and get everybody all hot and bothered to go on out and get those gosh darn Japanese. And then Roosevelt said, one moment, we're going to go get Hitler first, and then after Hitler's done, we'll come back and take care of the Japanese. And everybody said, what? And that's how that all worked out.
Oh, wow. Wow. Well, like I said, it's going to be interesting. And have you heard any conversation about the meetings with the South Korean officials?
We'll talk about that as soon as we come back from these words from our sponsors.
Okay.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we went to the commercial break, Claire was asking me if I'd heard any information about the results of Tillerson's meeting with the interim government of South Korea, and the answer is no. It's been very, very quiet, and from that I infer Tillerson did not get what he wanted.
Yeah.
And otherwise it would be all over. South Korea's on board. We're ready to go. But there's definitely pushback from South Korea. There's definitely pushback from China. I'm sure that Japan is encouraged to go along with this, knowing that all of these Americans are standing between North Korea and Japan. So it's kind of a safe bet for them. But it is a very dynamic situation. And at this point, a lot of people are saying, why doesn't Kim Jong-un give up his nuclear weapons? Well, because the nuclear weapons are not the issue. The issue is the United States wants a government of North Korea that will do what Washington, D.C. tells them to do.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The United States invaded Iraq knowing they really did not have nuclear weapons. And toward those last months before the war began, Saddam Hussein conceded to every demand from the United States, except for surrendering his nuclear weapons because he didn't have any. That's what they were getting. You know, surrender your nuclear weapons. I don't have any. We don't believe you. Come on in and look. You're a liar. We're invading. And the United States has such a long record, the U.S. government has such a long record of bad faith in all of these things. North Korea would be a fool to think that the U.S. Would comply with an agreement. I mean, look what happened in Syria. Syria gave up their chemical weapons that was the U.S. justification for military intervention in Syria. And Syria gave up their chemical weapons, and the U.S. is still trying to invade. And North Korea's got to be looking at that and realizing there's no point for them giving up their nuclear weapons. The U.S. is going to invade anyway because the weapons of mass destruction are not the issue. They're just the excuse.
Yeah, yeah. I'd like to kind of hop on over to the economy, and this comes from Zero Hedge.
Okay.
Another recession dead ahead.
Ooh, imagine my shock.
Yeah, and the indicator just hit, indicating that industrial production has never declined on a 24-month basis where it is now without the U.S. economy being in a recession. So we're there, folks.
We are there. And, of course, the reason all these companies manufacturing in decline, there are no orders.
Yeah.
And there's no orders because nobody's buying anything. Why? Because the money junkies grabbed all the money. The whole point of the private central bank is to siphon all the wealth of an entire nation and its people up to the pockets of the bankers, and nobody has a plan for what to do when they finally succeed, other than just sit there and watch it all fall apart.
Yeah, yeah. The other article in the financial area I wanted to mention is that food stamp recipients are increasingly the working poor, and nearly 32% of SNAP households are homes to at least one person who is working. And the article ends by talking about the unevenness of the recovery. And I'm looking at this, my jaw's dropping. I'm having a palm-to-forehead moment and thinking, recovery? What in the name of heaven are they thinking? Mike, there's no recovery.
No, there's no recovery. Look at the programs that you and I are involved with.
Yeah.
We have people coming in, people with families, and one of them's working, and it's still not enough.
Yeah.
The Keiki food program is because the food stamp money runs out in week number 3 of every month.
Yeah.
And these kids, without this program, are going to school the last week of every month. They're going to school hungry, and you can't learn when you're hungry, when your blood sugar is low.
Yeah.
And it really is. And, of course, part of that is the Department of Commerce over the last several years has been advertising. Come on, get on food stamps. Be dependent on us. And, again, another form of control. If you depend on the government for your food, you are not going to question government policies, even when they come to take your children away for boot camp.
Yeah. This alleged recovery is just a chimera. It's an illusion and something that is really non-existent in the lives of most working people here and also across the U.S., the mainland.
Yeah, it is an illusion, just like the illusion that we only have a 5% unemployment rate, the illusion that inflation is under control.
Yeah.
They're still waving the stock market around like it's some kind of a banner of economic success. But if you were to redraw the stock market in terms of adjusting for inflation or denominated in gold, you would see that the stock market is headed down. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And Claire, your next talking point is?
Well, we were going to go from there to there, I believe.
Okay. This story just came in. A member put it up at whatreallyhappened.com. Apparently, Turkish President Erdogan is urging all Turks who are living in Europe to have at least 5 children, and is saying the Turkish people are the future of the continent of Europe. Boy, talk about an undercover invasion, and undercover with multiple contexts on that one.
Yeah. And this, I think, we need to couple with the Erdogan threat.
I think it's the coupling that's going to be the problem.
Yeah, I hear you. Erdogan is threatening to let tens of thousands of refugees enter Europe illegally. And there was a quid pro quo, and all of a sudden, after the little brouhaha with
the Netherlands,
all of a sudden he said, I'm just going to let all these people go. This agreement that we had about us keeping the refugees, I'm not going to do it anymore.
Yeah, it's going to be $15,000 a month heading into Europe. Now, Germany did knuckle under on this, and they have set up 10 voting precincts, if you will, for Turks who are living in Europe but are still citizens of Turkey, and they have a right to vote. They're actually running a Turkish election on German soil because Erdogan is trying to get this constitutional referendum passed, which would give him much more power and authority, make him an autocrat. And apparently it's neck and neck, and I'm sure the vote riggers are out there in full force as well. And the fact that Turkey was not being allowed to literally send political campaigners up there to campaign to the Turks living in Europe was his sticking point. But then on the other hand, when was the last time you saw, well, for example, Marine Le Pen sending over campaign workers to the United States to talk to French citizens living here, let alone demanding our government set up and run an election on American soil for France? And that shows you just how unreasonable Erdogan is being on this.
And it's about to get singularly unpleasant in a heartbeat if he does this, if he follows through. And Mike, Europe can barely cope with the refugees it's already trying to absorb who have no education or language skills of their adoptive countries and cannot find work generally except for the most menial, which they are taking away from European nationals.
Well, Europe is not tolerating the refugee influx. It's already causing huge amounts of damage, economic, social. There are these no-go zones. There was that embarrassment where this Swedish member of the government had tried to lie to the world about there's no rape epidemic in Sweden, and he was forced to back up and apologize and say, you caught me, I'm lying. And it's all downside. For everybody involved on both sides of the question. The only ones who see it as an upside are these globalists who are trying to just take all of the different societies, populations, ethnic groups of the world, put them in a blender, hit puree, and then whatever comes out is poured into this matching identical mold of worker.
And one size fits all.
One size fits all, one color fits all, one uniform fits all, and you are all now Eloi, in service to the Morlocks who run the New World Order.
Yeah, you know, I am very blessed that I do know what my identity is. I do know what my background is. I do know where I come from. You know,
the problem is so does the NSA and the CIA and the FBI.
But I'm a little bit, I think I'm on the harmless side.
Yeah.
Except for logic.
I was going to say, we'll talk about the harmless thing off the air.
Okay. But what I am concerned about seeing, and we may see it, would be a call to, literally a call to arms by many nationals of many countries of Europe who feel that they have been completely marginalized and that their quality of life just isn't there anymore. And it's been diminished intensely by this flood of refugees. And unlike Holland, and you and I have shared some concerns about, did the vote riggers get in there and take it away from Wilders? You know, Wilders. I don't know that there are going to be enough vote riggers and electronic systems in places like France that can possibly squelch the rage of these people who feel that they've been betrayed by their governments to have allowed this to happen.
Well, in the case of the Dutch election, Wilders was come from behind, and he was neck and neck. The polls said it could go either way. The fact that he lost by such a wide margin, and other things that are beginning to surface, more and more people in the Netherlands are now convinced that, yes, their election, their attempt to legally find their way to freedom from the EU, was stolen from them, much as the way we saw massive election rigging that thankfully failed in the United States last year, the election rigging that failed in the Brexit vote, the election rigging that sadly succeeded in the Scottish independence referendum. But at this point, the people of the world are waking up and realizing that democracy is really an illusion, that we are dealing with governments that are autocratic, oligarchical, and they maintain the illusion of democracy to keep us happy and in our place, so that when they come up and slap us across the face and take our money and take our children, and we complain, they say, well, wait, no, you voted for this. This is what you voted for. And so sit down and shut up and give us your money and your children. And that's the hoax. That's the fraud.
And they're already having difficulty with certain immigrants into Australia. This was a big stink. In Australian primary schools, teachers have quit because Muslim students have been threatening to behead them and to hurt their families. This is not exactly a comfortable teaching situation, Mike. This is toxic as heck.
Of course it's very toxic. And again, and I've said this before, migration is a filtering mechanism. You are not getting the best people from those source countries. The best people in those source countries stay right where they are. They're perfectly happy. They're functional. They've got jobs. They've got businesses. What you get on the other end of that migration pipeline is you get people who couldn't make it in their old country. You're getting people who are fleeing prosecution. You are getting people who've been lured to Europe with just outrageous promises of all kinds of free stuff, and when they don't get that free stuff, they start acting out their rage and frustration. You're dealing with xenophobia in both directions, and this ridiculous idea from the migrants that the local indigenous ethnic population of these countries should change their country around to be just like the country that the refugees just ran away from. And it doesn't really make any sense. And it's turning into an absolute disaster. And it's going to be decades and huge, vast sums of money to undo all the damage that this George Soros dream of a new world order has brought down on our heads.
It's really bad. Also in places like Canada. And, you know, there have been, especially in some French-Canadian provinces, with the schools, there have been some principals who have fought back because the Muslim families coming in do not want bacon served, or any other pork product.
Boy, that's a biggie for Canada.
And this guy shot back and said, no, we are not changing what we do to please you. We are saying that you can have your kid bring a packaged lunch or eat something else other than the pork, but you cannot come in and expect that you are going to mold the culture to your former cultural ways. We thought you came here because you liked the way we do things, you know?
That's a very good way of putting it. Putin just a week ago was saying, you know, you're welcome to come to Russia as a refugee, but understand you are going to be in Russia. You're not going to be in your home countries. And it's a paraphrasing of what Teddy Roosevelt said about immigration. You're welcome to come to the United States of America as long as you remember you are now in the United States of America. And you will respect our culture, our traditions. You're allowed to maintain your own, but we have a language here that you must learn. We have laws here that you must obey, and we have certain social customs here that you need to get used to. And it's one thing for somebody who doesn't like pork to go into a new country and then just so order their own life that they're not dealing with pork. That's fine. We understand that. We're not going to force our bacon on you. But don't try and force your non-bacon agenda on us. That is simply rude. And it is rather amazing. Now, I've been very fortunate during my life. I've gotten to see a good part of the world, not as much as I'd like. I still have a few other foreign nations on my bucket list. But when I went to those other nations, I made the effort to try and learn as much of the language as I could before I went there. I was there on business. And in some cases, I got gentle laughter. but they respected the fact that I made the effort
Yeah.
to blend in and to integrate. And that was just the polite and respectful thing to do. But had I like gone on in to Germany and say, you know, I only want to talk to the people who speak English, and you know, where's my cheeseburger, and you know, forget that Bavarian stuff. I want a Budweiser, and they would have been very angry with me, and they would have been perfectly right to do so. Yeah. And unfortunately, because of that filtering mechanism on the migration, this whole refugee image is self-destructing. It's just incredibly negative around the world.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate because there are some very good people, you know, in that mix. I'd like to bop over to Venezuela, where they are dealing not only with hardship, economic bad times, but bread wars. And
the good news is there's no more cats, dogs, or rats.
Oh dear, ouch. President Maduro warned bakers, "I will make you pay, I swear." Now, what's happening, Mike, is that their wheat has to be imported because it doesn't grow there. And so with all the strictures, sanctions, and not being sure if the shippers are going to get paid, people are very wary about shipping anything to Venezuela in terms of getting paid.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to also take a look at the U.S. sanctions against the country, which have been significant in creating the turmoil in which we find Venezuela today.
It's economic war.
Yeah, exactly.
The United States has been at economic war with Venezuela going all the way back to Hugo Chavez, because Hugo Chavez actually wanted to run Venezuela for the benefit of the Venezuelan people, and that's setting a bad example for the rest of the planet here. We can't have that sort of thing going on. And, of course, he wanted to sell his oil for currencies other than the U.S. dollar.
And in terms of sanctions, just this last February, the Trump administration sanctioned Venezuela's vice president, Tarek al-Assimi, according to a Treasury Department statement, and calling him a drug lord.
We don't know that he isn't. I mean, over in Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai's brother is the biggest opium dealer in the country.
And, you know, I have to wonder, now this is the guy who's second in line for the presidency if for any reason Maduro needs to step down.
Before we do that, I mean, it is a stunning hypocrisy that a government that is one of the largest drug smugglers on the planet, the United States, is out there sanctioning a vice president of another country for dealing in narcotics. Maybe they're just trying to slap down the competition. Because that's what the war on drugs is. It's the war on the other guy's drugs. Our drugs are good. Their drugs are bad.
And, you know, I have to wonder, I would like to see something approximating evidence against this guy that doesn't look to me like it's faked. You know what I'm saying? Because I want to know, and the American people are tired of getting sold something. Oh, he's a drug kingpin. What's your proof? Trump administration. Come on, I want to see it.
At this point, after what we went through with Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi and everything, I'm not even sure that the image that we all have of Kim Jong-un is necessarily accurate. We're all being told he's a nutcase. We're all being told he wears funny sunglasses, and we're being told they're funny sunglasses. I don't know. Maybe in Korea that's the hot fashion. Okay. But at this point, we're in a situation where we absolutely dare not trust anything any politician or corporate media outlet is telling us, because we're just going to be suckered and lied to again, and the end result will be more war, more poverty, riches for the already rich, and a lot of very large graveyards after this next world war.
I'd like to bop on over to Russia now, because the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has said that any deal on Crimea to hand it back to Ukraine in exchange for Western sanctions is off the table.
Well, that makes absolute sense because, first of all, as it's turned out, the Western sanctions against Russia have actually turned out to be a good thing.
Oh, yeah, it's made it stronger and more self-reliant.
That's exactly right. Russia is now much more independent and self-reliant. In a way, the sanctions against Russia actually worked against the New World Order. Because the New World Order's plan was to sort of partition the earth, and this part would do all the food production, and this part would make all the cars, and this part would do all the electronics, and this part would do all the clothing, and you would swap back and forth, and it would make everybody dependent on the rest of the world for the basic necessities of life. And because of the sanctions, Russia has revived its manufacturing internally. It's revived its agriculture internally. Russia can stand on its own. It doesn't need the rest of the world. And that is a major, major loss to the agenda of the New World Order.
Yeah, and one of the things that they're doing when you talk about agriculture is non-GMO. And they are selling their non-GMO products all over the place.
Absolutely. And anybody that's not bound by the U.S. sanctions is going to Russia for their agricultural produce because they don't want to buy it from the United States of America. Now, there's one other aspect to this decision coming out of the Kremlin. The reason they're saying giving back Crimea is off the table is because doing so would tacitly agree to the Western perception that Russia had somehow taken it in the first place, and Russia's not going to go along with that because that is not what happened. There were 2 referendums in Crimea, and they both won by huge margins. The first one said, we're not going to be part of Kiev following the U.S. overthrow of our elected government. The second referendum said we want to merge with Russia, and that's what happened. But the U.S. position is we do not recognize the right of the Crimeans to self-determination, even though it's written right in the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And so, by default, Russia has stolen them. And as I've said before, this is like a guest at a wedding refusing the right of the bride to marry this man. Therefore, by default, the groom has kidnapped and raped the bride. And that's how faulty this whole logical construct is.
And it's really interesting from looking at the deep state in America, where some forms of peaceful self-determination are obviously more equal than others.
Definitely, definitely. You know, you can have elections as long as you vote for the people we want you to vote for. You can have referendums as long as you vote the way we think you should go. And more, the people around the world are beginning to realize that they cannot trust their democratic processes. And there is a pushback in many of these countries to restore honest, transparent elections, just like we're this summer going to really start pushing hard on energizing the American people to demand a complete tear-down and replacement of our current election system. They promised to do it after that debacle in Florida 2000. And they did absolutely nothing about it. Our election system is still the most dishonest on earth. We got to do some commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment on this Pauhana Friday here. And Claire, take it away.
You know, the mind boggles at how Orwellian some people have their thought process deep into. And apparently New York Assemblyman has unveiled a bill to suppress non-government-approved free speech. You heard me correctly. To suppress non-government-approved free speech. And if statements online are inaccurate, irrelevant, inadequate, or excessive, they should be pulled off the net, and if people who put them on the net don't, they should be fined $250 a day. Now, Mike, I mean, who in the darned heck is going to be defining such statements as inaccurate, irrelevant, inadequate, or excessive?
Any of those people that were embarrassing online by saying, you know, they're lying, they're cheating, they're corrupting, they got caught molesting children. It is absolute censorship, dictatorship. It is absolute violation of the First Amendment here. And by the way, I'd like to send a message to all our deep state monitors who are checking on this show to make sure that we're not being too offensive here. George Orwell wrote the book 1984 as a warning. It's not supposed to be an instruction manual. Please keep that in mind.
Absolutely, but I mean, I cannot imagine that this legislation will get passed. If it does, I certainly hope that it absolutely blown away by a First Amendment challenge at the Supreme Court.
Well, I don't know. Right now, this government is so afraid of the American people, I don't even trust the Supreme Court to comply with the Constitution anymore. They're just as co-opted as anybody else because the NSA and the CIA have been spying on the judges, and they have the dirt on the judges. We are in a spookocracy, if you want. And I think the strongest evidence of that, of course, would be Chief Justice Roberts, who was opposed to Obamacare, Then all of a sudden, the 11th hour, does a 180, says it's constitutional under the Commerce Clause, cast the deciding vote.
And goes to Malta.
And goes to Malta for a week because he didn't want to talk to any of the reporters.
Yeah, it's amazing out there. There are moments when I'm really glad that we do live kind of a dull and colorless life in most
well, I don't know. I think compared to some people, we're quite colorful.
Yes, in some aspects.
And so far, we've escaped prosecution for
yes,
it. So I
yes,
gotta tell you.
Yeah.
All righty. Have you got anything else, or I'll finish something in
I
here?
would like you to finish.
I will,
thank you so much for having
here.
me on.
Well, thank you for being had. Got to watch that laugh. I'm getting complaints from the control room that it I'm gonna have to put a compressor on your line again.
All right. Okay. Sorry.
All righty. Anyway, interesting. We talked about this yesterday, where all of a sudden Windows 10 is making it much more difficult to refuse and reject patches and updates. And you're always caught in that quandary between living with the risk of an unpatched system versus living with the risk of what damage and problems the new patches are going to cause. But there's another issue coming on out there, which is that a lot of Internet users are now on metered connections. The unlimited data programs are being taken out. They want to charge you per bit. And, of course, if Microsoft is dumping gigabytes of updates onto your machine constantly, it's going to run up your bill.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are very concerned about that. Okay, there's the music. It's time for us to get on out of here. We're going to get something useful done with the rest of the afternoon, I think, on this St. Patrick's Day.
Yes, of course.
All right, have a really good weekend.
Yeah.
Please make a point of sharing what you know with everybody that you know. We'll be back on Monday here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Aloha, America.